Hi everyone, and welcome to this second of a four-part webinar series provided by the NHS. It's fantastic to be here, and after the feedback we had from last night, we're ramping it up a notch and getting an Olympian with us tonight. And what an Olympian it is. No pressure at all, Beth. I hope you're well.
Not at all.
How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really good, actually.
How is everyone? Have you had a good day? I hear you've been doing lots of different activities.
I can only imagine as well with people, bouncing around just their core day jobs and obviously then trying to fit in the sessions as well.
Yeah.
It's so important, I think, for the organisation to provide an opportunity for them to take a break really and try and recharge a little bit, because we're pushing on to 12 months now of COVID. And with that, Beth, I know I see you shaking your head there. How's the last 12 months been for you?
Yeah, it's been very different, I think. I think if you'd asked anyone in March last year, would it last a year? I don't think anyone would have kind of given that message. I think everyone was kind of saying, let's get to the summer and everything will be back to normal. For myself at the time, I had a 10-month-old. I'd just kind of gone back to work. And then obviously we got the announcement of the country locking down, so nursery shutting. Freya had literally had 5 days at nursery, and then was back home with me, and I was working full time. So it was very strange. But do you know what? I've reflected a lot on it over the past year in what positives can I take from it. And the biggest positive that I've been able to take from the past 12 months is the amount of time that I've been able to spend with Freya and with my husband, Andy. Prior to that, I was working away a lot. I was bouncing around here, there and everywhere. So to actually have some time at home, see my husband and spend that kind of first year with Freya, watching her first steps, hearing her talk for the first time. Obviously we would have still seen that, but she would have been at nursery quite a lot of the time. So I think you do miss on some of those developmental stages. So for me, that's been a huge positive. And the reason I always look on the positives is from my kind of career as an athlete, there was always obstacles in the way. How can I get a better result? And you always kind of had to look at what the solutions are rather than what the problems were. And straight away, I kind of went into that autopilot. I've got my own business, which is recreational gymnastics. So literally I went from teaching 3,500 children a week to shutting the doors on them. And how do I still keep all of those children engaged in physical activity and keep them motivated as well? So between myself and my business partner, it was, we're both Olympians, so we both had that similar mindset of, right, here's the problem, what's the solution? So we basically turned, as everyone has, turned everything to online. So it's been an up and down year, but I think there's it's made me appreciate the time at home.
I think what I was thinking there was, in terms of, obviously you're really appreciative of spending the quality time with the little one, is everybody I think on the call is really appreciating the importance of family and friends, and because obviously we can't reach out and spend as much time as we can with them. What was it like when you were at your prime in terms of being an athlete? In terms, I can imagine bouncing around training camps, championships, world championships, European championships, British championships, Olympic cycles. You're in that bubble and that cocoon, aren't you, for years on end? Was that something that maybe you didn't pay as much attention to then, just because you were just doing what you did?
Yeah, I mean, I guess ever since I was a tiny tot. I mean, I started gymnastics when I was 7. It was probably more serious when I was 12. I was doing between sort of 25 and 30 hours by the time I was 15. So my life was getting up, going to school, going to the gym, doing the hours in the gym, doing my homework and going to bed, and kind of that repetitive cycle. And I always made sure on the weekends that I had time for family and friends, and just made sure that was fitted in. So yes, I did go about it that way, but I always made sure that I had time for my family and friends. And even during this lockdown, I've rang my mum and obviously my mother-in-law and father-in-law, so that they can keep up with Freya and my husband and me. We do that every other day. I was always one to speak to my mum and dad every day anyway. So it's been really nice for me to kind of be able to still keep that connection. I can't imagine what lockdown would have been like 10, 15 years ago without kind of video calling, and it would have been a whole different experience. But the fact that you can have FaceTime and you can have that face-to-face interaction, even though you're not physically in the same room as someone, that has been really beneficial for myself. And do you know what, we've had to teach my parents and his parents how to use Zoom and how to use, when we've been doing quizzes, how do you interact and stuff. But I think that's been part of the fun as well, is just kind of bringing them into the modern technology world. That they knew how to use WhatsApp calls, but yeah, they're pros now.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? But it's frustrating at the same time. I did something similar. I bought my mum an iPad just as we went into lockdown, and as she says, every time I speak to her, it's the best thing she's ever had. She can't believe how much stuff you can get onto it. You alluded to the point that you started at age 7, and obviously things got a bit more serious at 12. Yeah. Certainly from somebody who's not been in the gymnastic world, I get the impression that it's something that's got to be started quite young to develop what. And the reason I say that, Beth, is it seems that a lot of the elite athletes are quite young, they're teens.
Yeah, I think gymnastics has had a huge shift over the past sort of 15, 20 years. I mean, when I was younger, you could enter an Olympic Games kind of as young as 13, 14. They brought in an age limit in 2000, so you have to be 16 in the year. And for myself, when I won my first world title in 2006, I was 21, and I was the first ever non-teenager to win a world title. So I think that kind of shows how gymnastics is changing. And now there's lots of gymnasts on the women's side that are continuing into their 20s, continuing into their late 20s. We've got one gymnast, Oksana Chuzavitina, competed for numerous nations, won her first world medal back in 1991, and she was scheduled to compete at the 2020 Tokyo Games. And I think she must be about 44, 45 now. And it just shows that our sport has changed massively. And I think a lot of that is down to kind of the sports science support behind it. I mean, how that changed from when I first started on the senior team through to my preparation for London 2012. I mean, I remember picking up an injury back in 2002. I had to wait 6 weeks to get my scan. Then I had to wait another few weeks to get the results. Then it was another few weeks after that as to kind of what are we going to do about this. Whereas 100 days prior to the London Olympics, I noticed something wasn't quite right with my knee, highlighted it to my coach. Within sort of 10 minutes, I was seeing the physio. Within a few hours, I'd seen the doctor. Within 24 hours, I'd had a scan, I'd had the results, and within 48 hours, I'd had my surgery. So the difference in sports science has played a huge role in allowing elite athletes to further their careers for longer.
Yeah, it's amazing that the progress things have made. And during those early years, well, you know, the theme for tonight is obviously performing under pressure. So I want to get into that a little bit in terms of when was the first time you sort of felt pressure? So rather than just going out and performing and playing, and also when did you first identify where it was coming from? And what I mean by that, was it external pressure to perform, or was it internal pressure to perform?
100%, it was always internal. From a young age, I was always a perfectionist. I always wanted to be the best that I could be, and I would get frustrated with myself if I wasn't, to the fact that sometimes in training, my coach would just say, no, calm down, everything's fine, don't worry, you're not going to get it first time, it does take time to get things. So I would definitely say the pressure was always from myself. From my parents' point of view, as long as I was enjoying the sport, they just supported me. And obviously when I was a youngster, they were kind of the support mechanism of financial, taxi service, food, everything that kind of comes with a parent's role. And then from a coach perspective, the only thing she ever said to me before a competition was, do what you do in the gym. So what she had trained me to do, she never expected me to go above and beyond that performance, because that's not what you train to do. To perform a routine or to perform a skill, I would have had to prove in training that I was able to confidently complete that skill successfully on a number of times. There was never a chance where you would just say, do you know what, we'll just try it on the day. I wasn't a gymnast that could ever have done that. I always had to know going into a competition, I have done so many routines that was successful. And that's what put my mind at rest going into a competition. The biggest pressure moment I ever felt in my career was definitely London 2012. For a number of reasons. I'd been to 3 Olympic Games, Athens in 2004, where I finished 9th, so I was first reserve for the bar final. Beijing in 2008, where I finished 4th in the final, and that was the biggest heartache and disappointment of my career. And then going into London, I was 27 years old. I'd won everything you could possibly imagine within gymnastics. The one thing that was missing from my career was an Olympic medal. So I put the pressure on myself because I really wanted to finish my career with that medal. I had that pressure of it being at home. For every Olympian, it is the best feeling to be able to say I've represented Great Britain at the Olympic Games, and to be able to say that you did that on home soil is just the kind of icing on the cake. But with that comes pressure. So as obviously there was a lot of brands that were sponsoring the games. So in the lead up to the games, literally wherever I went, from a shop to filling my car up with petrol, the London 2012 logo would be in your face. And it's kind of like, oh my God, it's still 7 months away. And yet it's being thrown at you constantly, plus all the training that you're obviously doing day in, day out. So yeah, definitely London was the most I've ever felt under pressure. Every other competition, the only target I ever went in with was to perform to the best of my ability. But for London, it was that. I wanted to perform to the best of my ability, but I was so wanting that Olympic medal.
And how did London 2012 go in terms of performing under pressure?
Yeah, so qualification, for anyone who doesn't understand gymnastics or has never watched it, so we have a team qualification. So you have 5 in your team and you put 4 gymnasts on each apparatus. So I was obviously part of that team on bars and floor. If qualification goes wrong, that's your whole Olympics over. So for me, the most pressurized day was that qualification day, walking into that O2 arena knowing that I had 35 seconds on the bars to make or break my dream. And luckily enough, that routine was probably one of the best routines I ever did, and qualified through to the final. And then you've still got another week before your actual Olympic final. We had team finals, so I was still with my team, I was still performing. And then your teams start to obviously drop off depending who's qualified for different event finals. So by the end of the week, it was literally myself, my coach, and the medical staff kind of going to training. And to be honest, the training wasn't needed then. I'd done all of the hours preparation leading up to the games. But when you're in the Olympics, you live in the Olympic Village, you go to the Olympic food hall, you get on the Olympic buses, you go to the Olympic training venues, you're literally in this bubble. And for me, I had to go training just for something to do, because otherwise you're just sitting in the Olympic Village all day. And Team GB is great. We've really got that ethos of one team. So even though I was part of the gymnastics team, you get to know everyone, whether it's boxing, whether it's swimming, whether it's athletics. They have a board up that tells you who's competing that day, what medals have been picked up, what results. They have team colour days, so you have to wear red, then you have to wear blue, then you have to wear white, so that everyone feels part of that team. So yeah, it's intense. And that week leading into that final was probably the hardest week in my life. Just kind of, I was seeing people like Jess Ennis, Mo Farah coming in. They were literally turning up, do 2 days of competition, taking their Olympic titles, and thanks very much. Whereas my competition was kind of spread over 10 days. And to be able to kind of mentally focus and being able to switch off and switch back on when at the right time was probably the hardest part of it. But that comes from obviously years of competitions that I'd already done.
Yeah, everything leading up to that moment. How important was your support bubble then? So you're talking about your other team members, but also, as you said, your coaches and even your parents and having that outlet.
You know what? My mum and dad thought it would be a great idea after the Olympics to celebrate my success. They kind of said to me, how nice would it be that we invite everyone that's kind of been a part of your career to come and celebrate with you? We didn't realise how long this party list was going to end up. So I think by the end of it, we had about 120 people that have kind of, from friends' mums that had to pick me up from school to take me to the gym because my parents were working and her daughter went to school just down the road, to the physios, to the doctors, to my teammates, to there were so many different people. And there's one thing I know for sure, that I would not have achieved what I did without that support network. I mean, my friends at school, for example, in sixth form, I only went to school on a good week 5 half days a week. All the other time I was training. And for the first 2 months of lower sixth, I lived at my national centre preparing for the World Championship. So all of my schoolwork was just sent to me before the days of email. So it's actually sent in the post and I had to just complete it and send it back. And then I would go to school on a Thursday afternoon to see how I got on with it. But I had the best friends. They basically wrote all their notes for me. They did whatever they could to help me because they knew I wanted to achieve both academically and within my sporting career. It had always been, I knew that gymnastics wouldn't necessarily be a career for me from a young age. Obviously, gymnastics wasn't something that I thought I could make a career of, so I always wanted to have that backup plan. So that's why I made school a priority as well. So my school friends were hugely instrumental. My teammates that I were training with day in, day out, obviously you're training up to 30 hours a week. And yes, there are days where it's frustrating. You can't get the routine that you want to. And you just look across at your teammate and they pull a funny face, or they do something and it just puts that smile on your face and kind of puts everything into perspective. So that really helps. Obviously my coach, I had 2 coaches when I was younger before I moved to Liverpool, but they are in the gym as many hours, if not more hours, as you are. And Amanda would be prepping every single routine for me. She would work out what's the shortest routine we could get with the biggest difficulty, with the least execution problems. So there's just so many people involved within my career. And the medical staff, well, yeah, I had a list like this of injuries. And yeah, there's 100% I would not have got through it without the constant physios and strength and conditioning and the doctors. I mean, I worked with one team doctor who sadly is not with us anymore, but he did most of my operations when I was younger, and I just knew that I could trust everything he said. If he said I wasn't ready for competition, I believed him, and I just would hold back on my recovery. The amount of kind of phone calls to him sort of saying, look, I'm worried about this, and he would kind of see me straight away. And it's really important for athletes to build up that trust with that support network around them.
I think you just took the word out of my mouth there. I thought what was coming out from me was not only the importance of the support network to enable you to perform under pressure, which is what we're talking about, but it comes back, and this was a theme last night, and I know we had Greg on last night, fantastic Greg White, talking about teamwork, etc. That trust is vitally important, not just in your team, but in your coach and in yourself.
Yeah, if you don't trust yourself, who else is going to? And I think I was taught very young to believe in myself, because especially with gymnastics, when you're going out and performing, if you go out all shy and not believing in the routine that you can do, then it will show. I always say to the younger gymnasts now, I mean, Simone Biles, who is an American gymnast, hugely successful, the way she portrays herself and the way that she does her routines, she just shows how much she enjoys gymnastics and loves what she does, and really really emphasizes that. And I think I always say to the youngsters, look, when she's doing that floor routine, has she got a smile on her face? Is she showing off to the audience? Is she trying to engage that audience back? And they say yeah, and that's half the battle with gymnastics. You're stood at the end of a bar routine waiting to go, or you stood at the end of a vault run. You've got to have that positive mindset of, I can do this. If you stand there saying, oh, I'm not sure if I can do this, that is when the doubt, and that's when the mistakes start to kick in. And I did find that in training, because obviously when you're learning new skills, of course there's nerves there and stuff, but the trust that I'd built with Amanda and the team around me, whether it's medically or whatever, if they would never ask me to do something unless I was 100% ready to do that. And that's it takes time to build that trust, don't get me wrong, and people have to earn that trust as well.
Yeah, definitely, and it has to be reciprocated, doesn't it? I think we can dig a little bit deeper here. I know Diane's emailed in with a question. She's put in the chat box as well. And basically what the question is about is that internal dialogue, the way we speak to ourselves. Now, yeah, there you go. That resonates with you. So you said earlier that, growing up, the pressure created was all internal. It was you putting pressure on that perfectionist, that I need to strive for excellence and I need to perform well. What's your journey been like in terms of, from that young athlete to where you are now? Has there been points of growth and development on managing your internal voice? What's that been like?
Definitely has been. I mean, I think the first kind of insight I had to it was when I moved to Liverpool, and started doing more competitions, and obviously doing more competitions that were at a national level or an international level. And I had, my coach had brought in a psychologist to kind of give us an insight into the kind of how you can help yourself perform. And I remember one of our first tasks was you had to go and lie by the piece of apparatus. You had to close your eyes and watch yourself doing the routine. And I just remember thinking, are they just like taking the mickey here? Like, have they got a camera watching me lying underneath a set of bars? And I didn't necessarily fully believe in it at first, but actually throughout my career, due to the amount of injuries I had, visualization was a huge part of my performance, so much so that pretty much every session I was using it. It would be, you've got 5 bar routines, actually physically doing the bar routine, and then go and sit under the bars, imagine competing at the M&S Arena in Liverpool. And obviously if you've already competed there, you've kind of got what the crowd feels like, what the lights feel like, what's the environment. So you would then have to visualize yourself performing. And a lot of people do it in different ways. I used to watch myself doing it rather than be myself doing it, whereas some of my teammates actually could be themselves doing it. I could never get my head around that, and I found that I had to, even more weirdly, I had to keep my eyes open to do it. So half the time I'd just be stood underneath a set of bars with my eyes wide open, staring into space, and people would probably just think I was gone a bit crazy, but it was really, really helpful throughout my career. And it, like I said, it got more and more helpful the older I got, because the older you get, the smarter you have to train. When I was younger, I could do more numbers, but obviously when you're sort of 25, 26, I just couldn't do the routines and the numbers that I used to do when I was 16, 17 years old. So I used visualization instead of that. And the times where I had an ankle injury or a shoulder injury and wasn't able to be on bars or be on floor, I would just use visualization instead of actually doing the routines. And I feel that did help me with my career.
There's been so much research in this area around visualization, in terms of the golden rule is it doesn't guarantee success, but what it does do, definitely 100%, it increases your chances of success, because you've still got to do the hard work. And I think that, going back to some of the points from earlier on, is that if through positive visualization and positively execution of your role, even in a day job, going in and doing the best possible mind, putting yourself in the right mindset to execute the role. If you, on the flip side of that, you're constantly replaying the negatives, what could go wrong, exactly the same. You're increasing your chances. Yeah, you're increasing your chances of it going wrong, aren't you?
Yeah, we're all guilty. I think we're all human. We're not robots. So someone could say 10 nice things to you and one negative thing, and you would walk away not remembering the 10 good things they told you. You would walk away remembering that one negative that they told you about that performance. So I've kind of learned, right, what is it? How do I walk away from every day or every session with a positive? So before I left the gym, if I'd had a hard day, eventually I got into the habit of doing it every single day.
Yeah.
What was the one good thing that came out of this session? So even if I had the worst day in the gym ever, every routine was flat on my face, my positive would be, by the end of the session, I still achieved an outcome, whatever that outcome was, whether I managed to do one routine. Do you know what? I fell flat on my face 10 times, but I got up and did one routine, even though I'd had all of those failures before it. So I would walk out of the door of the gym knowing that I'd picked myself back up, rather than just letting myself fall deeper and deeper into that negativity. And I've kind of used that even when I've stepped away from gymnastics, because I think over the past year, everyone has found it difficult. I work from home, and I found it very difficult to be able to kind of switch off from work and going back into what you would normally do on an evening. You're tempted to just get back on your laptop and do something.
Yeah.
So I've just done other things. So I've started doing puzzles, most random thing ever. But then I kind of always think to myself, do you know what have I achieved today? So for me, I always have a tick list. I love a tick list. My husband thinks I'm absolutely bonkers. And most of the time I do the tick list the night before. So when I wake up in the morning, I know exactly what I've got to do. And it takes everything out of my mind. And then by the end of the day, I can kind of look at that tick list and go, do you know what, I've completed 70% of that. That's a huge achievement. And don't get me wrong, everyone has lazy days and bad days, and you sometimes might only tick 2 things off. But that's how I kind of self-motivate during this time.
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think that having some sort of base rules for yourself really helps, I think. So a lot of the guys and girls we work with, we talk about, we've got to understand these rules of life, and is that life isn't fair. The goalposts are going to move, but what you are in control is your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So now what you're going to do. So and what that does, it enables to take away any of the sort of victim mentality that we can tend to have in life, because life happens and it's unfair. But the quicker we can get through that and start thinking logically ahead and having our lists to make sure that we can keep that forward momentum, it gets really beneficial. But one question I've got, and it's only a little bit of fun. So it sounds like you're a perfectionist, you like your lists, but potentially a bit of OCD in there. Or is it CDO, because that's alphabetically correct?
Does it count when I've got like my wardrobe all color coordinated?
I think so.
My friends used to think I was mad, but obviously I was away a lot, and occasionally they had to send stuff to me, so I'd be able to say to them, just go in my wardrobe and it's on the left hand side because that's the color all. So yeah, I do like things in a certain order.
Very organized. I was going to say about, you know, your times at the Great Britain Gymnastics Academy, because was you at the Lilleshall? Was that where you did most of your training?
Yeah.
Oh, I was there a few years ago on a course, and I must confess, I'll share this with the guys, is that I think Nathan might have been there actually. He was on the call. We were delivering a training course, and we stayed in the accommodation, and we went down for breakfast into the food hall in the morning. And one of the most inspirational things I saw happened, and I don't know, it must have been the GB under-8s team walked in. They were about 2 foot tall in their little GB tracksuits, you know, with their food tray, hardly looking over it, but fully self-sufficient. You know, I'm here I've got myself up, I've got my shelf, I've got dressed. And that's part of the routine. It's that self-discipline, isn't it? And that probably feeds into that, well, I know where everything is.
So Lilleshall was a big part of my career. I first started going there, and that's our national training centre. So I started going there when I was about 9 years old. And when I spoke about missing school for 2 months, I basically lived on site for 2 months. For anyone who doesn't know Lilleshall, it's a bit like Hogwarts. It's like a huge drive up there. So unless you've got a car, once you're dropped off, you're stuck there. But I had so much fun. I've got so many fond memories of being with my teammates. They've got huge gardens that you can go and run around in. And obviously when you're 9-10 years old, that's great fun. They get loads of snow when it does snow, so you can build great snowmen. So yeah, I've got so many fond memories, but I do think discipline it's a huge part of being an elite athlete, and from a young age as well.
Do you know that routine you had in terms of, I suppose it's not just the training, it's all about the recovery as well, isn't it? And we talked about this again last night, but that consistent routine of obviously preparation, execution, recovery, did that enable you to build confidence and therefore allow you to perform under pressure because you knew what your set routine was?
Yeah, I guess so. I would say so. And my preparation, a lot of it that was kind of modeled by my coach. She would kind of set out a training plan, but we would then sort of discuss it if I don't know, I wasn't feeling right or I'd picked up a small niggle. We would then obviously manipulate that program to make sure that I was not pushing myself too hard during that time, and then being able to perform. I always just had to tell myself, do you know what, there's another competition, because if you put yourself under that much pressure for that one competition, of course it's going to be hard. Whereas obviously I spoke about London being the hardest point in my career, but I guess the reason was I knew there wasn't another competition. I hadn't openly admitted that I was ever going to retire after London. I didn't want that pressure on myself. And even after London, it took me a year to retire because all I'd ever known since I was 7 years old was gymnastics. If I stepped away from gymnastics, who was I? What was my identity? And so having that pressure in London was very different. Whereas, like I said, for a normal competition, I would always say to myself, do you know what? You've done the hard work, you've done the preparation, go into that competition, see what happens, good or bad, there's always another competition to work towards. And that was my way of kind of coping with the pressure, because otherwise it's far too much pressure for just thinking there's only ever one event. And looking back, I I think as a youngster, you would tell youngsters now that I always wanted success yesterday. I think most people do. They want the results yesterday. Whereas actually, had I told a younger self, it'll take 20 years to achieve an Olympic medal, I think you would have said, that's a long time. But in that 20 years, you're going to have a roller coaster. You're going to have some great highs of winning world titles, but you're going to have some real lows, whether that's Beijing and the heartache of that, or whether it's picking up an injury. So I think being able to say to youngsters, do you know what, just take that pressure away. There's so many other pressures in life that just don't focus everything on one moment.
Yeah, and that resonates with me. So we're business coaches really, and leadership coaches, but we do work with a lot of athletes, and 2 or 3 of them were due to go to Tokyo last year, and then obviously it got pulled. And
Yeah.
I must confess, what happened as soon as that announcement came through, a lot of our conversations were around perspective.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of naturally they'd been on a 3 or 7 year cycle towards this, you know, this one event. And of course you're going to be mad. Of course you're going to be angry. But realistically, you know, that bit of perspective is there's a global pandemic going on, and this thing is bigger than them as an individual and bigger than the Olympic Games. And I think that really helps. But what you've done really well, completely coincidentally, is set up really nicely for a couple of questions, which I want to ask, because we're talking about profession. So the first one is, what advice would you give individuals who are constantly feeling the pressure to succeed by their loved ones?
Oh gosh. Do you know what? It's open communication. One thing that I always had from a young age was communication. So I was obviously an athlete that was doing full-time school. I was doing 25 hours a week in the gym, and I wanted to be successful at both. And had it just been down to me and managing both of that, I just don't think it would have been possible. Whereas we almost created a triangle of communication. So my mum and dad would speak to my coach to find out when were competitions happening, when were the kind of pressure points within the gymnastics calendar. And my mum and dad had also spoken to my school. They went to my high school before I even started there and said, look, she's an elite athlete. She might be off school for a week here or there. She might be at training camps, etc. Will you kind of support that? And because they had gone to them and clearly explained that I still wanted to be doing my schoolwork, that opens that gate of communication, so that when I was struggling with schoolwork, my parents and myself, depending on obviously how old I was, they were able to speak to school and say, look, do you know what, she feels that the homework is getting a bit too much. Can she just catch up at lunchtime, or catch up during a PE lesson, because obviously I was getting quite a lot of physical education outside of school. And by having that communication, it took the pressure off myself. So I relate it back to that. If you're struggling, whatever it is, have that open communication. And it might be hard to do it face to face, so maybe write a letter, or for youngsters, can you get them to draw a picture of what are they feeling at that moment in time? Because for youngsters, it can be quite hard. They may not even understand it. They may not realize they're under the pressure because it's coming from a loved one. But by drawing pictures and stuff, they may be able to kind of show their emotions in that way. So it's the hardest thing, I think, in life, but communication is the best thing, but can quite often be the biggest pitfall, whether it's in business or just family life.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll be honest with you, as you were sort of giving those stories there, I think my brain was going all over the place. I was thinking of, you know, the times that I've been on the side of a football pitch with youngsters, and you see, you know, the parents shouting and screaming, putting pressure on, you know, the next Cristiano Ronaldo, you know, and even I've seen in the workplace where leaders and managers are getting, you know, the long screwdrivers out for their members of staff, you know, putting the pressure on. And more often than not, it says more about the parent or the leader or the manager than the individual. And I think that what we've got to understand is that when people are put into a pressure environment that they don't want to be in, they will rebel. And I'm sure you've seen this, Beth, in your time, that there was some super talented gymnasts in your era, that we've never heard of. They maybe stopped at 12 or 13 because they just couldn't put up with it anymore.
Do you know what, for me, there was so many more talented gymnasts than myself. And I think from my perspective, because I wasn't necessarily one of the most talented when I was a youngster, I had to graft. Everything I did was just through hours and hours of practice and falling flat on my face and looking at my coach going, how can I make it better? And the simple answer is, well, don't land on your face. Being able to kind of graft and get back up. But yeah, it is difficult. And I think just communication is key. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with the immediate family. Children or adults, they might sometimes trust someone that they don't actually know. They feel that they can open up more to someone that they're not involved every single day with, because they may feel that they're going to hurt someone's feelings if they say something to them. Whereas if you can kind of do it in a different way, there's always a way of communicating it. It's just finding what's best for that individual. And unfortunately, there's no one size fits all. Everyone works in very, very different ways.
I think what you said there actually carries through life, because we work with a lot of NHS trusts, and what we find is when we come in as coaches and we're impartial, and we sit down with somebody and say, look, we're impartial, we're here to help and support you, how can we help? It comes out. You know, and it comes out because we're there to help and support. We're not reporting back to any management or leadership. We're here to work with that individual to help them as best as we possibly can.
And I think also having someone, so one thing that worked really well for me was having almost two sides to my life. So I obviously spoke about having the academic and the gymnastics side. So I did 1 year leading into the 2004 Olympic Games, where I'd just completed my A-levels. All of my friends had gone off to university. I made the conscious decision to train for the Olympic Games. So all I did was gymnastics. My friends had all gone off around the country, and that was probably one of the hardest years because I just couldn't switch off from gymnastics. If I had a bad day, I'm going home and thinking about it because I didn't have an exit avenue from that stressor. So I spoke with my coach and my parents and decided that university straight in 2004 was a really good idea, and would I be able to combine both? So John Moores University were doing a sports scholarship, so I thought, you know what, I'll just give it a go, and it was the best decision I ever made. Mainly because I have my friends who, they were students. They loved going out, loved going partying. I lived with other sports scholars, so they understood my training regime. But I was still able to go and hang out with my friends that weren't athletes. And do you know what? They didn't care what I'd done in the gym. They would kind of say to me, did you have a good day? And I'd say yes or no. And then it was kind of like, right, what are we doing for tea? Or where are we going tonight? And it kind of, like you said before, it gives you that perspective of gymnastics is not the be all and end all. And it allowed me to take a step away. So I always talk about having the Beth gym Beth and kind of everyday Beth. And as soon as I shut the doors on the gym, I kind of left all of that worry, or if there was anything that I was frustrated with, I could kind of shut the door on it. And then vice versa, if I was at university and I was struggling with an essay, I could kind of go, do you know what, I'll put it to one side and I'll go and do my routines in the gym. And for me, that just really worked because I had an exit strategy of getting away from that stress.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. And the people on the call that are, especially the guys, whether they're on the front line or in support services with the NHS at the moment, they're 12, 14, 16-hour days, in critical care. What we've got to remember is that we need to look after ourselves as well. And I think that where you're saying that, Jim Beth would close the door, I think sometimes as best we can, we've got to come away from it. Even if, on the drive home, we listen to our favorite music or put a podcast on or whatever it is, that invests in me, allows us to close those doors. But there is another question following up here, Beth, and it's, when you're under pressure, sometimes asking for help can seem like the hardest thing. you know, is there any particular help or advice you'd give somebody that maybe that wants to ask for help but it's quite difficult?
Yeah, when I retired from gymnastics, I went from kind of being the best in my sport and being at the top of the game. I mentioned earlier, I've got my own business, and I went from being understanding everything, knowing everything, to suddenly being in a world where I didn't understand anything. I would go into these business meetings, they'd be looking at balance sheets and profit and loss sheets, and literally it would just go straight over my head, and they're going, do you understand, Beth? And I'm like, yeah. If they had asked me a question about it, I wouldn't have been able to give them anything back. And I used to secretly write little notes in my book. And then when I came out, my dad had been involved in business for obviously the whole of his career. So I used to phone him and be like, Dad, please help me, I don't understand what's going on. And he would sit with me and go through everything. And he kept saying to me, Beth, just ask. The biggest thing is pretending that you understand, because then the expectation of the people around you is that you do understand, and why aren't you contributing? Whereas actually I've learned by me piping up and saying, can you just explain that? Or I don't have a clue what you're on about, please just take it a step back. And people are more open to you being honest that you don't understand something. And obviously there's things that you can do to help your own personal development. So I understood what my weaknesses were. I took it away. I've done a master's, and I'm constantly trying to improve that. But even still now, if I'm in a meeting and I don't understand something, I just kind of probably chicken out a little bit. I write it in the chat box, which is in this past year. But someone will respond to you straight away and give you the answer, and then it kind of triggers a thing. And then if it's something that I still feel that I need to know more of, I'll write a note of it and I'll go away and look at it and research it. But it is hard to ask for help. But once you get over that hurdle of asking for help, actually you feel more invigorated, because actually people are more willing to help you than what you realize.
Yeah, and they've only got to look around themselves in the NHS. Everybody gets in there to provide that service of health and care that people are only willing to help. I think sometimes, you know, when you're especially if you're in a career role and you're looking to kick on, you know, you think that asking for help is a sign of weakness. Well, actually, it's not. It's that sense of humility to say, well, I don't know everything. Oh, actually, I'm feeling it right now. I'm tired. I'm burnt out. I'm stressed. I'm overworked. I'm overloaded. You know, I'm trying to homeschool. You know, I've got the commuting to work. I've got, you know, all the other life's pressures on, which, as I said last night, for those that are on the call, those pressures were there before COVID, you know, so there was warning signs about us being burned out as humans, you know, before the COVID. We were just constantly overstimulated. That the sooner you ask for help, the better. Just make sure that it's somebody that you trust or you think that's going to provide you the right level of support, I think is really important.
And if it's not, if you don't feel that you get the support back, then try someone else. Just because that one person hasn't given you the reassurance or the help that you need, maybe it was just the wrong person to ask. Don't then say, do you know what, there's no point me asking. Well, actually, I'll go and find someone else. And it doesn't always have to be a senior person. Sometimes you feel, like you say, if you maybe ask someone that is, I don't know, in a position that's below you, they'll go, hang on a minute, my manager or the senior doesn't know this, why am I kind of looking up to them? But it does show that vulnerability, and actually everyone has that, and it's showing that that's not a bad thing.
No, definitely. And if there are people on the call that are feeling a bit burnt out and they don't know where to go, you've got my email address, guys. So if you want to pick up the phone or pick up an email, just drop us an email and we'll have a chat around that. We've got a couple of other questions here, Beth. Just funny enough, similar questions. How did you get the courage to speak up when you felt under pressure? We want our staff to stay so and encourage that. That open culture is a big part, isn't it? And I think the NHS is a big one. It's about hierarchy. So everyone's at grades and bands and layers. Yeah. And I think actually at a time, especially like COVID, you just got to flatten hierarchy, you know, and go to something like, you know, whoever's the best suitable at the time can lead that conversation rather than thinking I'm the most senior.
Yeah, we have within our business, we try and always be open and transparent. And during COVID especially, we've obviously people have been off on furlough, some people have been in on flex furlough, some people have been in full time. So we've tried to manage that. And by doing that, we have a weekly meeting. During the first part of COVID, we had a weekly meeting where it would normally be director level only, but everyone was invited. Directors would kind of run their meeting as normal, but everyone could ask a question, and all of the questions were answered. No question was seemed as a silly question. There is never a silly question, and I think I've always tried to encourage my team to sort of bring a question to the table, because quite often if you're thinking that question, do you know what, there's probably 10 other people in the room that are also thinking the same question, and they're thinking, should I be the one to put my hand up or not? I'm sure we've all been there at school or university or in a conference, and you don't want to be the one that puts the hand up, but actually most of the time everyone's thinking exactly the same. For me, it's when people start using acronyms and you're sat there and you're not concentrating on what they're discussing, you're trying to work out, what does ROZ mean? And you spend 10 minutes working that out, by the time you work it out, you've missed what the actual conversation was. So just feel free to always ask for help, and the people within the business should always encourage that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where leadership and management plays a massive part in it. And I'll assure you now, Beth, there's nothing like the public services that love an acronym. I can tell you that now. Last question then. And it does link to right back to the conversation we had at the start, where you said, you know, you were really hard on yourself as a youngster, and, you know, you're driving yourself to perfection. The question from Nick was, how do you deal with pressure that is self-inflicted? Some people put pressure on themselves when the world around them has not.
And do you know what? I think that's half the problem most of the time is when you take a step back and go, why am I feeling under pressure? Oh, it's because I'm doing it to myself. No one else has asked for this piece of work to be done by 10 o'clock tonight or by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. You've set your own expectations. So I think it's when you're starting to feel that pressure, I have a notebook and pen with me the whole time. So when things start to get on top of me, I go to my notebook, I write everything down, and it takes it out of your mind. And for me, it's usually 5 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep and you've got something that's going through your mind and you're thinking of all the worst case scenarios to do with it. Well, I write in my book, what is the worst case scenario with that? And then I work backwards and write down the facts that I know to do with that scenario. And then by the time you wake up, you go, what was I even stressing about? So very much using a notebook and pen, very old school, and also just taking a step back. If you start to feel like the world is kind of caving in on you and you've got a load of pressures, well, actually step back and work out, what are those pressures? Where are those pressures coming from? And how do you relieve some of those pressures? Because sometimes you'll find 90% of them aren't actually there. It's you that's putting that pressure on yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that comes really nicely to one of your first quotes, which was concentrate on the solutions rather than the problems.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Just as a way of wrapping up, I can't believe the time. It's 5:02 already. Have you got a little something on your desk there that you wanted to show everybody?
Yeah, sorry. I should have brought it up when I had my talking about the Olympics, but I thought I'd just share my Olympic medal. So this is the one that I won in London 2012 for my bar routine. So you can see it's got the logo on the front and the rings on the back. You may just be able to see it's got a big dent in it. So after the Olympics, we had a parade around London on open top buses. And then we were outside Buckingham Palace whilst Boris Johnson, who was obviously the mayor of London at the time, did a talk about how good it was. And as I stood up, I dropped my medal. So it's got a huge dent in it, but I was devastated at the time, but it's got its own story. No one can ever say that it's their medal, because I know it's got a big dent in it. But this is one of my probably most memorable moments in my career, but everything that I had achieved before it allowed me to achieve that without those other successes and without those failures. One thing that I always say to children, I do a lot of work with sort of children in primary schools, they're scared to make mistakes. And I always just say, do you know what, mistakes are your friends. Without making mistakes, you can't learn. And don't get me wrong, I made lots of mistakes in my career. Kids say to me, did you fall in gymnastics? 100% I did. One of the biggest falls was Olympic final, first piece of apparatus, I'm on the beam, 3 falls in a minute and 30, like the biggest stage you could possibly be on, and there I am flat on my face, literally flat on my face because I stacked it, and worst performance of my life on the biggest stage. But having gone through all the other competitions, once I came off that piece of apparatus, I kind of go, do you know what, there was nothing I can do about that, and I had to pick myself back up, and the next three routines were the best of my career at that moment in time. So yeah, you can have such roller coasters of days, and I'm sure all of you guys have, especially over the past 12 months, had roller coaster days.
Yeah, roller coaster, or Corona coaster, as it was quoted as last year, the Corona coaster of life. Well, that's a great way of finishing up there, I think, Beth. From my perspective, all I'll say is I'm a little bit disappointed with the medal story. I thought you were going to be in a nightclub in London, threw G&Ts in, and it was dropped down. But so insightful. Thanks so much for your time tonight on behalf of the guys up in the Northwest there. I really appreciate it. There's so many takeaways from there. And as I said at the start, it has been recorded, guys, so it's going to be shared. It'll go up onto YouTube. So if you want to revisit it, if you want to share it with colleagues that maybe need to listen to these key messages, I thought it was fantastic. And I've made a load of notes, that was for sure. So thanks so much for your time, Beth. It's much appreciated.
No, thank you. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you guys. I mean, what you've had to go through for the past 12 months is incredible. And I know that not just myself, the whole of the country are behind you, and cannot thank you enough for everything that you are doing.
Yeah, guys. So take care of yourself, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Take care.